The most exciting thing about this project is how complicated it is.
We are in the process of trying to cram the proverbial 10 pounds of horse manure into the 5-pound bag.
It is a project that at times seemed to rival in complexity sending men to the moon. It took 5 years, cutting-edge science, millions of dollars, and endless discussion.
You want to put something in there
There's nothing in
for
there.
some reason that yet to be discovered.
Opening.
It hasn't been discovered. Why you want to use it? That's kind of disturbing.
The result of all this effort? 9 metal boxes. In effect, large picture frames. What are these boxes for? What would justify this massive effort? In fact, they are destined to contain the most valued treasures this country has ever produced. A few pieces of parchment. The Declaration of Independence, the United States Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. Together, they define the structure of our government and the ideals of our nation. They have been called the Charters of Freedom.
I think it's great to see what it really looks like instead of just seeing it in a book.
To actually see it yourself, like the original, is not, you know, you don't really have the opportunity to do that every day.
They were written in the heat of war and during the battle for the establishment of the new nation. But over the next 150 years, the charters, particularly the Declaration, became creased and torn. The words faded. In 1995, conservators began a heroic effort to prevent further deterioration. Can these documents, the birth certificates of the nation, be preserved? Saving the national treasures, right now on Nova. Every day of the year except Christmas, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and the Bill of Rights are on display in the National Archives building in Washington, D.C. To shield them from the damaging effects of light, they are displayed in a dimly lit room and covered with green-tinted glass. Over 1 million visitors come to see these documents every year. The Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights lay out the structure of our government. They are the supreme law of the land. But the centerpiece, the most beloved of the charters, the one that everyone comes to see, is the Declaration of Independence.
When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another.
Unlike the other documents, it does not define the form of our government.
The separate and equal station.
But as an expression of some of the most profound ideals of the country, it is the most revered.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
The Declaration is being composed in the heat of battle. The British are arriving with hundreds of ships and thousands of soldiers. The American colonies are under attack. The Declaration of Independence not only announces the formation of a new nation, it is a declaration of war. A scribe copies it onto parchment. In this time of great danger, members of Congress decide to sign, to actually put their names to the document. In doing this, they are marking themselves as traitors to England, and will be hanged if captured. Today, the signatures of those courageous men have mostly disappeared. The Declaration is torn and dirty. Its ink badly faded, almost to invisibility. If it weren't for a hungry insect in the 1940s, the Declaration could be in even worse shape. It was housed in a case at the Library of Congress along with the U.S. Constitution. Carol Kreitz was a scientist working for the government.
Well, one day they inspected it, and they found a dead buffalo bug down in the bottom corner of the case. And there was a place where the buffalo bug had been eating out of the edge of the parchment.
Carol Kreitz worked on the design and manufacture of a set of hermetically sealed cases to protect the documents from further deterioration. They were covered with 2 layers of special glass, and the air inside was replaced with helium, an inert gas that won't interact with parchment. Sealed shut, with no provisions for ever reopening them, it was believed that these encasements would safeguard the documents for centuries. In 1952, with great ceremony, President Harry Truman dedicated their new home at the National Archives.
Here, so far as is humanly possible, they will be protected from disaster and from the ravages of time.
It was the height of the Cold War, and every night the documents descended 20 feet down into a vault designed to withstand all natural and man-made disasters. Even an atomic bomb. This was cutting-edge technology when it was created. But now, only 50 years later, the cases themselves are developing problems.
I'll get it positioned in the Meg if you want to come over and have a look.
Examining the cases with microscopes, conservators can see subtle changes. Chemical reactions are causing the glass itself to deteriorate.
And there we are.
Tiny crystals are forming on the surface, a process known as crizzling.
There appeared crystals, and there was fear that the crystals might be growing, and this could lead to some really serious problems with the glass and its proximity to the parchment, the charters themselves.
As the documents move up and down in its mechanism, there is a fear that vibrations are abrading their delicate surfaces. This starts the conservators wondering what else might be going on inside these aging sealed encasements. Has the helium leaked out? Are the documents surrounded by the proper humidity? Perhaps the very encasements, which had been so elaborately designed to protect these precious documents, might actually be damaging them. Something has to be done.
Given the time frames that you have to operate in government in terms of getting appropriations and follow through, we didn't have a lot of time to waste.
A high-powered team is assembled. Physicists, chemists, engineers, conservators, all world-class experts in their fields.
That helps so much because it not only reduces the size, but it cuts down on the weight.
Each person on the team has a particular specialty.
The framing, the top framing.
Nathan Stoloff designed the cases for many important documents, including the Gettysburg Address and the Magna Carta.
Well, this is a very important national project, and of course, a lot of people from the archives and other agencies of government and scientists of renown are involved to make sure that we get it all right.
And you assume that since the document's on a tilt, the convection current is going to go further.
Chris Evans is an engineer working for the National Institute of Standards and Technology. This is the agency that tells us, among other things, the exact length of a second and the weight of a pound. NIST, which has some of the most precise manufacturing and measuring tools in the world, will be making the cases. The charters are all written on parchment, the cured skin of a sheep or cow.
If you have this edge of this...
Don Etherington is a world expert on the preservation of parchment.
It's not attached to anything, it's placed on a platform because we don't want to introduce any adhesives and no real restraints, because if you restrain parchment, it wants to move. It wants to get back on the animal, if you like.
Extraordinary talent assembled to build what are, in effect, large picture frames.
You can do it all sorts of ways, but I mean,
the project will take 5 years and cost almost $5 million. No effort will be spared, because these cases will protect our nation's most precious documents. And precious indeed is a 30 by 24-inch piece of parchment. The Declaration of Independence. The history of this one document is, in a very real sense, the history of our country. July 1776. War has begun. The Continental Congress appoints a committee, including Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson. Their job? To draft a proclamation announcing that the colonies are separating from England. The committee, in turn, appoints the young Thomas Jefferson to actually write the document. After much editing and many revisions, the Declaration of Independence is made public. At first, it only exists in printed form, in newspapers and pamphlets. It is widely distributed, posted, and read aloud, so that Americans will understand this momentous decision. Then the Continental Congress prepares a more formal handwritten copy on parchment. This is the document that they sign.
Look, they were fighting a war. They used just parchment they could get at some store in Philadelphia. It wasn't that they went out to see if they could get the best parchment available. This was an announcement of an important decision, but it wasn't going to mean anything unless they won that war.
The Declaration of Independence has two parts. The first part, the ringing phrases we remember today.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Was for Congress merely an introduction, similar to the beginning of the Virginia State Constitution. Its words espouse the fashionable ideals of the Enlightenment
and the pursuit of happiness.
But for the founders, the meat of the document was the inventory of grievances against King George III.
He has made judges dependent on his will alone. He has kept among us standing armies without the consent of our legislatures.
A very long list, which we have almost forgotten today.
Ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns.
The important part of the Declaration are, in modern terms, the bullet points of this is what the king has done that justifies the revolution. Of course, today, that part is, if it's known about at all, no one can name anything in it, except perhaps they might say no taxation without representation. The Americans weren't hotheads. They only advocated independence from a king if you could prove, good lawyers that many of them were, that they had a strong, airtight case against him. And so for them, that was the critical part of the Declaration.
During the Long War, the Declaration of Independence is repeatedly rolled up and thrown into trunks along with other government records, and moves every time Congress moves. And Congress moves frequently during the Revolution, trying to avoid capture by the British Army. From Philadelphia to Lancaster, then to York, Pennsylvania, and finally back to Philadelphia.
In the rush of wartime, when supplies were scarce, when the work that the Congress had to do was overwhelming to everyone, this document was probably not seen in their minds as something that would live forever in history. They made a bad guess.
The challenge today is how to preserve this badly deteriorated piece of parchment for many centuries to come. To protect it, the designers of the encasements must understand the properties of this ancient writing material. Parchment starts out as skin, usually the hide of a sheep or a cow. The skin is soaked for weeks in lime, and then the hair and flesh is carefully scraped away. After it has been stretched and dried for weeks, the result is a thin and perfectly smooth writing surface. But it is skin, and all skin is damaged by the environment. We spend millions on sunblock, antioxidants, and moisturizers to protect our skin. But ultimately, the aging process takes over. With parchment as well, ultraviolet rays, oxygen, and fluctuations in humidity all wreak havoc. But with the proper protection, parchment's deterioration can be virtually stopped. That is the job of the new encasements. The new encasements will be made up of a few basic parts. There will be a base, milled out of a single block of aluminum, with pockets cut out to reduce weight while maintaining rigidity. A platform will hold pure cellulose paper and the document. The front of the case will consist of a piece of clear, colorless glass, incorporating a special coating to reduce reflections, and a titanium frame. The frame, glass, and base will be held together with bolts. Finally, the air inside the case will be replaced with argon, an inert, colorless gas which will not react with parchment. 1 year into the project, the basic design of the encasements has been established. But many crucial decisions have yet to be made. Today, the group is debating a particularly contentious issue. One of the critical concerns in the preservation of parchment is humidity.
So that the cellulose of the collagen...
In all the other cases that he has designed, Nathan Stoloff has used silica gel to hold the level of humidity constant.
Silica gel is used in many encasements all around the world for the last 30, 40 years, and it's been proven to be trouble-free and very good at maintaining humidity control.
Silica is the same material that you sometimes find in the packaging of electronic equipment. In these encasements, Stoloff is proposing that chambers be built into the base of the cases to hold the gel. He argues that the gel will maintain a constant humidity in the case by absorbing moisture when the atmosphere is too wet and releasing moisture when it's very dry. But other members of the team question the need for silica in the completely airtight enclosure they are proposing.
The experience in using absorbers has been for leaky boxes where the relative humidity has to be maintained by something inside the encasement. But inside of an airtight box, the situation is a little different.
You will be able to see.
The argument hinges on the question, can the team build a truly airtight box? One with such a perfect seal that virtually no air will ever leak into the enclosure for centuries to come. To achieve this proposed airtight seal, the contact between the glass and the base must be absolutely perfect. The challenge for the engineers at NIST, to polish the metal of the base so that it becomes absolutely smooth, completely flat, even at a microscopic level. Guided by a computer, a sharpened diamond slowly moves across the base, producing a mirror finish on the metal. It takes an additional 8 hours of hand polishing to get the seal surface perfectly smooth. But when it is checked under a special microscope, an imperfection shows up. Only a few microns in diameter, it looks like a huge pit and must be reworked. In theory, the cases are airtight, but the glass and the metal must continue to maintain their perfect contact, even under the most extreme conditions. If the seal doesn't hold, it will be back to the drawing board. Today, a punishing test. The encasements must be able to protect the documents, even if Washington were struck by a severe tornado, causing a drastic change in atmospheric pressure. This one hit just 30 miles from the National Archives. A sudden change in air pressure can cause a building to explode. In order to simulate this effect, the engineers have put the model into an airtight drum.
There we go. Or maybe if I tell it record, it will stop shutting off. It keeps shutting off.
The drum will be sealed. Then the pressure inside the drum gradually altered, and the effect on the encasement carefully observed.
Hang on, guys. Let's not get too excited until we've got the lid down.
A tiny camera inside the drum allows the group to watch what's going on.
Yeah, I got the hoses.
The test today will push the case to its absolute limits to see how much pressure it will take to break the seal and to determine at what point the glass will crack. Pressure on the case increases. The instruments indicate that the glass is starting to flex.
Well, the good news is the laws of physics still apply.
Yeah. The bad news is the glass hasn't broken, but the base is bending.
Yeah, it really is.
Get rid of 4 psi or something.
I'm assuming that tempered glass will go like the windshield on your car goes.
What was it at?
Right around 50.
I just wrote it down 46.2 on the meter.
Right. Yeah.
That's impressive. Kitty litter box.
This was a very extreme test. What it means is you can't take one of these sealed encasements up in an airplane. You can't drop them in a deep body of water, but we're not planning actually to do either of those things for other reasons.
Also, definitely see some of that plastic deformation.
The encasement passes its first big test. The seal between the metal and glass held until the glass itself broke. And before breaking, it withstood 4 times as much pressure as the specifications required, and much tougher conditions than it would ever experience in the real world.
Things I forgot to write on the agenda.
Since the encasement seems to be truly airtight, there will be no need for Nathan Stoloff's silica gel.
I don't think the advisory committee thought too much of the argument there.
Always looking for ways to make the cases smaller and lighter, some members of the committee suggest that the chambers that were to hold this gel be eliminated.
Whenever that's ridiculous. Really? When it's determined
The argument is becoming heated.
But we ought to leave a chamber in there for something that we may want to do in the future, for something that somebody else after us might want to do in the future.
I just can't agree with that logic.
We're not designing protection for physical problems that we envision now. We're going to design for problems that were going to occur in 30 or 40 years.
I disagree. That is a mistaken assumption. You want to put something in there
There's nothing in
for
there.
some reason that yet to be discovered.
Opening.
It hasn't been discovered. Why you want to use it?
Yeah. Well, we'll try and figure out what the volume difference is.
Opinion remains divided, but the final say is in the hands of a scientific advisory board, which is insisting that the chambers be removed.
I think it's unfair to have a group of advisors at the top, no matter how illustrious they are, to say the design shall be such and such. They will not face, just a minute, they will not face the responsibility if something goes wrong. The designers will take the crap.
We've got too many different parties working on different schedules and agendas. And to hear now at this point that, sorbent is in or out, that's kind of disturbing. Sure if we're trying to meet a schedule that we are contracted to, we're not going to make it.
Removing the chambers inside the encasements is a big change. A whole new testing model will have to be constructed, and that will take months. But preservation of the founding documents is not on the minds of Americans in the years following the Revolution. The Founding Fathers, however, are becoming mythologized, almost as gods. Soon their words and everything they had touched come to be regarded with near mystical reverence. Especially the Declaration of Independence, which bears their signatures.
After the War of 1812, new generations of Americans came into authority. These were the children of the revolutionaries. Independence and the Constitution were the achievements of their fathers, and they wanted to preserve that record. They collected the documents which were scattered, which were being lost. They went out and interviewed survivors of the revolution so those memories wouldn't be lost. They were dedicated to preserving the record of the revolution, which they regarded with almost religious fervor.
As the author of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson is obsessed with promoting his own legacy. He encourages the famous artist John Trumbull to paint this fictional scene of the signing. In reality, the document was signed over the course of a year, long after the assembled delegates had gone home. Jefferson's efforts are highly successful. The Declaration of Independence, which was primarily a long list of grievances against the king, now becomes the defining symbol of a heroic age.
Is at this point that the Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, commissioned a facsimile of the original document by the engraver William Stone. The process Stone used is controversial. He may well have used a wet pressing process. What this involves is taking a very thin piece of paper, putting it over the surface of the original document so that it will pick up the image by literally absorbing some of the ink. You have a mirror image of the document, which was then put on a copper plate and carefully etched into the plate so that he could print a copy of the Declaration of Independence that was as close as human beings at that time were capable of making. What we know of the Declaration of Independence, the image in our minds, is not the original document, it's the Stone facsimile.
The printed reproduction only increases people's fascination with the original document. They want to see the actual parchment, signed by the founders. In 1841, it is put on permanent display in this building, formerly the Patent Office, now the National Portrait Gallery. It hangs on a wall facing the direct sun, and there it remains for decades, slowly fading into near invisibility. It isn't the fault of the ink. 18th century ink is an extraordinarily durable substance, which brings us, surprisingly enough, to a wasp. The main ingredient of the ink is produced when a wasp lays her eggs in the bark of an oak tree, which forms a nodule, or gall. Galls are rich in a chemical called tannic acid, a substance that is also used to tan leather. Since Roman times, it was known that if you crushed these galls to a powder and mixed them with iron sulfate, they would react chemically to produce a deep, black, indelible ink. Properly preserved, documents written with iron gall ink can last for centuries. For example, this is the Magna Carta, a document penned in 1215, establishing the rights of English freemen and a precursor to our Constitution. 800 years old, its writing is still vivid today. The reason? For most of that time, it was kept hidden away in a cool, dark place. But the charters of freedom must be out on display, exposed to light, 10 hours a day, 364 days a year. This would be hard on any written document. And that is why the design of these new encasements is so critical. The cases are part of a larger project, a major redesign of the rotunda at the National Archives, where the documents will be displayed. The heavy green glass will be gone. The lighting will be improved. And the Declaration will be down off its altar and much easier to see. Marvin Schenkler is supervising the redesign.
The current thinking is the Declaration of Independence will be on the left of the center. In the center will be the 4 pages of the Constitution, and on the right will be the Bill of Rights. This is a particularly difficult space to work with because one of the biggest issues we had to deal with is handicap accessibility. So our solution was to take the steps out and lower the cases to the same floor elevation as the rest of the rotunda. This is the one and only prototype. This is our one and only shot of getting this right. Once it's fabricated, it's too late. So if we've messed up here, we're in big trouble.
1861, the Civil War. As important as the Declaration of Independence was to the founding generation, it becomes even more significant during this country's greatest crisis. President Lincoln becomes committed to abolishing slavery and needs the moral force of a founding document to justify his position. But neither the Constitution nor the Bill of Rights, the two documents which establish the political framework of the United States, contain any assertions of equality.
Neither of them says that all men are created or born equal. Neither of them says that men have certain inherent rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If those ideas were important to you, if you wanted a document to give them legitimacy, the only document they had was the Declaration of Independence. So the Declaration took on a whole new life and a whole new function as a statement of our liberties.
The founders had considered the essential part of the Declaration of Independence to be that long list of complaints against King George III. But during the Civil War, the country's leaders turned to the preamble, those noble-sounding words about equality, with absolutely no legal authority.
The Declaration of Independence is reborn in the 19th century, particularly with Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War, is reborn as a ringing condemnation of slavery and as a ringing set of principles for America to live up to in terms of egalitarianism.
By the time the Gettysburg consecration occurred, the war had dragged on and was just horrifying. There had to be some greater moral reason than just to keep the Union together. And so Lincoln reframed the founding and said that our fathers had created on this continent a new nation dedicated to the proposition that all men were created equal, and that we're now engaged in a battle to see whether a nation so conceived and so dedicated could long endure. He made the Civil War a fight for the freedom of black people. And by doing so, he had to change the meaning of the founding.
A document which earlier in the century had sentimental value because it was signed by the founders is transformed during the Civil War into a document with real moral authority, an expression of the ideals of the nation.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights.
Coming down.
July 2001. The documents descend into the vault for the last time. The rotunda closes for renovation. The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights leave the National Archives building to be transported to a secret location. There they will be examined, repaired, and put in the new encasements. For the purpose of security, special trucks with an extra sensitive suspension system will make many trips, sometimes carrying some of the documents and sometimes carrying empty packing boxes, decoys. For this operation, the Declaration has been given a special code name, Elvis. The last time they had been moved, half a century ago, the documents in their then state-of-the-art encasements had been delivered to the National Archives with great ceremony. Carroll Kreitz was there. As a young man, he worked on the original encasements and was present when they were soldered shut.
The sealing of the Declaration went very smoothly, and it took all day. The guy that did the soldering did a real nice job. It was beautiful. I wished I could solder like he could.
The head of collections for the Library of Congress, Alvin Creamer, supervised the work.
Mr. Creamer started going over the Declaration inch by inch, and down in the lower right-hand corner, he suddenly reared back with the consternation all over his face and said, "There's a hair in the enclosure." Well, we all gathered around, and sure enough, there was a hair in the enclosure. But you had to look twice to see it.
A hole was drilled in the side of the encasement, and the offending hair was removed. Then the encasement was resoldered shut, as they believed at the time, sealed forever. Elvis has arrived. Home for the next 2 years is a highly secure room, dust-free, equipped with special lighting, temperature, and humidity controls. Here, the documents will be painstakingly examined and restored. Alyssa O'Loughlin, Kitty Nicholson, and Mary Lynn Ritzenthaler, conservators for the National Archives, have the unenviable task of figuring out how to open the cases that were soldered shut 50 years
I
earlier.
don't think you need the pressure now so much.
There is no instruction manual.
Yeah, it doesn't really want to cut in quite the same way as the strip.
It's really different mechanics.
Yeah.
'Cause it's,
They begin with what is considered to be the least important of the documents, the transmittal page of the Constitution, essentially a cover letter.
Some bits.
Alyssa has created a special tool for the process. It functions rather like a can opener.
Dead center. So it theoretically seems that it would be pretty easy.
It's really just going to be a process of scraping the stuff away until we hit glass. Well, in a way, we're going to be doing it blind with the other one.
I know.
Every shard and scrap is saved. Even the helium has been extracted and stored. Every step of the operation is photographed. Meticulous records are kept. These are, after all, conservators.
It is almost like butter.
It's like very cold butter.
Right. I've got sharp edges.
Yeah. I'm resting on the glass.
Okay. So are we
You want to rest it on the blotter?
With the outer glass removed, the delicate job of lifting the second piece of glass begins, the one that is resting directly on the document.
come under all the...
Was something attached? I heard something pop. I didn't know that was...
No, it was just the click of
okay. Whoops. Glass just slid in that direction. Okay. And this is a point where you would check for offset of the image?
The crizzling is quite evident. A snowstorm of tiny crystals on the surface of the glass.
Okay, so we're going to try wafting or the blotter technique?
The opening of this first, less important document is complete. Now the conservators must unseal the remaining cases, carefully examine each document, and make needed repairs. The renovation of the rotunda has been underway for a year and a half. At the National Bureau of Standards and Technology, the production of the encasements is forging ahead. In futuristic machines, a 600-pound block of aluminum is transformed by computer-guided tools into a finely crafted 40-pound base. The frames are milled from the ultra-strong metal titanium. Finally, they are electroplated in gold. It takes 3 years to unseal, examine, and restore all the pages of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The experts have established that the crizzling of the glass had not damaged either of those documents. They are in remarkably good condition. But what about the fragile and faded Declaration of Independence? The conservators have deliberately saved the most crucial document for the end. They know that this one piece of parchment will test all their years of training and experience. Exposed to the air for the first time in 50 years, the document can finally be seen directly, without the interference of several layers of glass.
615.
Every inch of parchment back and front will be inspected. The size, the thickness, every crease, crack, and tear is measured and carefully noted.
About 17.
13.
Valuable information for future conservators.
It seems so thin compared to
obstruction.
Yeah, no, that we're going to count down. 6.
Every letter of every word microscopically examined.
There's hardly any ink left. It's as though it was washed away. The ink really is just a memory here.
Lots of horizontal creases, and these are very characteristic of having been rolled.
The intonation of the handprint, positionings of...
Right, we've been aware of this print.
A mysterious handprint from the past. No one knows who made it, or when.
It certainly still stands out.
The signatures in the center are very difficult to see original ink.
So the John Hancock, even without magnification, it's pretty obvious that there's a coloration.
There's a sense of kind of...
It appears as if someone in the 19th century has tried to restore some of the faded signatures by re-inking them, including the most famous of them all, that of John Hancock.
And the J and the H and the K.
In the past, restorers would try to bring a document back to its original condition, even to the extent of replacing missing text. This is what the person who inked over Hancock's signature was trying to do.
I wonder if they just did those 3 large letters.
That's certainly what it looks like.
Today, there is a totally different approach. Conservators focus their efforts on preventing further deterioration, but other restoration is kept to a minimum.
A branch, complex tear. I mean, I think the entire corner was pretty much detached. That was really...
The conservators decide on only one small restoration, to mend this edge, which is located near an old tear, an already fragile part of the parchment.
I want to both trace and shape this piece of Japanese tissue paper to fill in that loss. And I'm going to do it in such a way that I have the full thickness of the paper where there's no parchment, and it's pared away to create a very gradual overlap. One of the guiding principles of modern conservation is reversibility. So we'll use adhesives that we know we can redissolve. And you always try to do it in a way that should your successor need to undo it, it can be undone.
Apart from this repair and some light surface cleaning, over the next 2 months, conservators will continue to meticulously examine and photograph this document, and nothing more. The creases and fading, the tears and even the dirt have all become a part of its story.
That's the history of the document. The document is faded legitimately. It was rolled up and dragged from place to place. It was subject to William Stone's wet pressing process. It was hung across from a bright window in the patent office for 35 years. This document has a right to be faded.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed.
August 1963. Martin Luther King stands beside the Lincoln Memorial and calls for the new birth of freedom that Lincoln had promised. A freedom that for King means an end to discrimination and segregation. A freedom that means liberty and justice for all.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
As a black youngster, I knew that somewhere it was written that the United States proclaimed that all men were created equal. I don't know where it was, but I knew it. And I knew someplace it was written that the laws were supposed to apply to everybody equally. I don't know where, but I knew someplace it was.
The Declaration of Independence in many ways is more alive today, broader and more idealistic a document than it was when it was originally written. As we have moved into civil rights movements, women's rights movements, Native American rights movements, gay liberation movements, as we moved into a very rich period of trying to establish an all-inclusive body politic, an all-inclusive citizenship, then the ringing words, all men are created equal, become vital and critical in a way that I think Jefferson would have been astounded. Because he certainly did not envision a world in which his African-American slaves would be going into the voting booth beside him. And even more so, he did not envision a world in which his daughter or his wife would go into a voting booth. So I think he would be stunned at what has become of this little phrase of his.
May 2003.
So let's put the top in first.
The Declaration of Independence is being placed in its new encasement. Masks and gowns ensure that no offending hairs will slip into the display. Behind ultra-clear glass, and with an improved lighting system, even this badly faded document will be much more visible to the millions of visitors who will come to see it.
Looks beautiful. Looks very nice, yeah.
If all goes well, it will be opened again only after a very long time, perhaps by conservators yet unborn. Five years after the process began, the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, and the Declaration of Independence are back on display.
The words are so powerful, so beautiful, so noble that they became a centerpiece of our understanding of who we are as a people.
Abby Fofana.
In the renovated rotunda of the National Archives, a swearing-in ceremony.
Hyacinth Louise Williams, Barbados.
New citizens, men and women from everywhere on earth.
Donahue O'Neill Stewart, Jamaica. Rema G. Collin, Uzbekistan. Pierre Antoine Noel Pazo.
Unique to this nation, we swear allegiance not to a ruler or a piece of geography, but to a set of ideas. Words written with quills on the skins of animals more than 2 centuries ago.
Miriam M. Nok, Iran. Aida Enservit, Bosnia.
Over the next 200 years, people will view the documents. And the documents in their new encasements of glass, aluminum, and titanium will look out on a very different world. One thing is certain. Though the words remain the same, their meaning will continue to change, evolving, adapting to new times and circumstances, to a world that we and their authors can scarcely imagine.